reading something about them. In those days, there was a small booklet translated from Thai to English. So I read this small booklet, and I thought this was very good teaching. Went to see him up in Luang. Unfortunately, my Thai was not very good. But Ajahn was in what Chah, international forest monastery, so he could translate. So I asked him some questions, and he answered my questions. I had been saving up my questions because I didn't speak Thai well enough, and the Thai teachers, I didn't have any direct contact with the Thai teacher. I was more or less just living in a forest monastery up in Chiang Mai and doing my own practice, which I learned in Sri Lanka before that, and I read the scriptures. But invariably, as we practice meditation, there's some maybe more personal questions arise. You know, the general teaching, especially from the scriptures, for example, can give us general guidelines for practice. Instructions for meditation, sitting down, watching our breathing, but maybe as we continue with that, then some more personal questions arise. For example, some people find quick success with watching the breathing. Quite easy for them. They get some peacefulness of mind, some tranquility of mind quite quickly. Other people not so easily. Because they have different kind of thoughts, different kind of mental states coming up that maybe are not so easy to deal with. Or we can say sometimes that when we begin meditation practice, first of all we learn to deal with the more coarser states of mind, ones which are stronger or more obvious to us. But then, if we continue with meditation practice, what can happen is that if we aren't developing more awareness, more mindfulness, more clarity, then some of these different states of mind, disturbing states of mind, go deeper. They go behind us. And they take on a different form. You know, for example, perhaps we know that there's three basic roots of unskillful thought and action. Greed, aversion, third one? Delusion. Oh, this is a vast group here. There's three. Well, I take one, say anger, for example. And maybe it's reasonably easy for us to see anger in its very general or coarse forms. But anger has many expressions. Irritation, resentment, these are a little bit below the level. You know, we don't notice irritation. We know when we blow up and get very angry, but noticing a little irritation with people, maybe something like resentment in the background, just resenting something. But it is still a form of anger or aversion. So maybe it takes us a little bit more awareness, a little bit more clarity to see these other different expressions of something like anger or aversion. And if we aren't actually having them pointed out to us, you know, in the scriptures it's not mentioned that there is irritation and resentment are forms of anger, just as anger in general. But we ourselves, if we don't get this kind of anger that explodes, some people, they don't get angry just by exploding, but they're behind in the background, simmering resentment. Don't quite like it, don't quite like it, don't quite like it. And if you haven't had it pointed out to us, or if you don't have the clarity of mind or the awareness, perhaps we don't even notice it. Because it's not mentioned as an unskillful state of mind. If you don't get really angry, that's pretty obvious. But if it's just this simmering background resentment, don't even notice it. But what can happen is it just builds up and builds up and builds up, and one day some innocent person comes along and says, "Hey," and boom. We say that they get dumped on. They get all this backlog of resentment, perhaps, get dumped on them. And it wasn't even their fault. They just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. So sometimes some of these more personal expressions of some of these states of mind, which also can cause confusion, can cause the mind to be distracted or disturbed, sometimes we don't notice them, perhaps. So maybe if we continue with our practice, These are in the background, but you don't notice them yet. So these questions build up and build up. So over 3 years practicing on my own in Chiang Mai, I had a backlog of questions. I went up to Ajahn Chah's monastery. Unfortunately, I couldn't speak to him directly, but I talked to Ajahn Sumedho. And very simply, he answered my 3 years backlog of questions in 30 minutes. So I realized, it's very helpful to be with somebody who has some wisdom, practice, many years experience. So I moved from Chiang Mai to Luang. I stayed there for about 6 years. And it was, at that time, Ajahn Chah was teaching. Normally he taught in Laotian dialect. The northeast part of Thailand is influenced by Laotian people. So they have a certain dialect there. And very hard to understand. There's no books about it. You just have to kind of listen and ask questions and find out. But most of the Westerners learned Thai language. So, but he wasn't always teaching in Thai. Except in the later years of his life, he had many disciples coming from Bangkok. So he taught more in Thai language, Central Thai. And it wasn't his native language, so he spoke very simple Thai. So even I can understand it. I can say it was very simple language, but actually it was very profound, very deep. He was trying to put teachings which for many people are quite, they're deep, but they're also a little bit abstract to them. He can put it in a way which is very simple. And some people, maybe they misunderstood. They thought, he's a bit simple. He doesn't really understand. But if you reflect and contemplate what he says, very, very deep. Very, very deep, some of the teachings. So sometimes some of these teachings I reflected upon. I mean, he was giving these teachings not as an exercise in sort of education, but as a reflection for meditation. And one of his teachings, which I remember the most, is something, one phrase. He said, everything is teaching us. You understand? Everything is teaching us. Most people, they look to the teacher for teaching. Or they look in the book for teaching. And he said, everything is teaching us. Sometimes he gave these examples of little ants crawling in the forest, the leaves falling off the tree, as lessons to learn. Something that's like impermanence. We learn about impermanence, maybe just from a leaf falling off the tree. We look at the tree and we think, there's all these nice leaves on the tree, and it's only a tree because it has leaves on it, and then one of them falls off. Very different. Now this tree is not so solid anymore. We look at it and we think, there's a nice solid tree with nice green leaves, and then you notice a leaf falling off. The tree now is apart, changing constantly. That's how everything can teach us. This is applying, this teaching is implying that people are meditating as well. If we're only taking it in with our brain, leaf falling off a tree, so what? Don't really understand it. But if you're meditating, if you have some quietness of mind, some calm of mind, then these simple little things we see very clearly. Our mind's not distracted, not scattered. Some people see a leaf fall off a tree and they don't even notice it. No big deal. But if your mind is very calm and you can see these simple things, they have much deeper meaning because our mind is very still. And